Well, we are officially in the month of November, and I really started to think about it as I was looking at my Nintendo Switch 2 here and realized that we are officially 5 months into this system existing. And I then decided to look at the games that I had and was thinking about, do I really like some of these games that I picked up? And then I started thinking about it more of the stuff that I really regretted buying for the Nintendo Switch 2. And I thought what would be really cool, since the system has almost been out for 6 months at this point, is to talk about the games that I regret buying for this system and kind of give to reasons as to why I was not happy with my purchase of those games. However, there are still incredible games onto the Nintendo Switch 2. These are the ones that I just felt very disappointed with the direction that they went, things that I felt that they could have done way better and they chose not to go into that direction. A lot of what I picked is stuff that I felt was incredibly lazy, and I figured this would make for an interesting video. So without further ado, let's start talking about some more Nintendo Switch 2 games. This one was probably the first game that I got incredibly disappointed with onto the Nintendo Switch 2 hardware, and interestingly enough, it was a game that came out within the first day of the system releasing. That game is none other than Sonic Shadow Generations. Now, if you followed this channel, you will know that I talked heavily of the Nintendo Switch port of this game last year. I thought it was one of the best Switch 1 ports out there for the platform. So when they announced that a Switch 2 version of the game was coming out, I was kind of interested in figuring out what that they were going to do, because the only other thing that I could have thought that they would do to make this better was have it be 60 FPS. So part of me was like, if they're not giving us a free 60 FPS update to the game, they must have did some really groundbreaking things with this, with the Switch 2 hardware. Guess what? They did bare bones to this. In fact, I don't even know how Sega managed to do this. But with the Shadow Generations part, you have two options. You have a performance mode and a quality mode. And the performance mode has it to where you can play Shadow Generations at 60 FPS. But guess what? This is the part that I am truly confused by. The game is at 720p when you put 60 FPS mode on for Shadow Generations. How did Sega fumble this bad? I don't even know what in the world they were thinking with this, let alone not giving Switch 1 players a free update to this. They made us pay this game twice. Well, I guess they didn't make people pay it twice, but if you're someone like me who has the Switch 1 version right here and really wanted to play it on the Switch 2, you couldn't get it for free. You had to buy the game all over again, and this is what they did. I'm not a game developer, but I definitely feel like they could have done 1080p, 60 frames per second, especially for the price that you're paying for this. This was ridiculous. I don't know what Sega was thinking, but this was one of the ones that for me was one of the worst Nintendo Switch 2 purchases that I had made, because I was just completely flabbergasted because I didn't think that that could have been possible. But I will notice as we get through the video that there's a similar theme that I've noticed with Sega when it comes to their games on Switch 2, because this is not the only one that ended up being really disappointing for the platform. That being said though, if you haven't gotten the Switch 1 version and you're able to find the Switch 2 version of this game for like 20 bucks, it's still great, but the point of the matter is they should have been able to do the 1080 60 frames per second. I don't really understand why there has to be a different setting for that into the game. I shouldn't have a performance mode and a quality mode within a Sonic game, in my opinion. And I know Shadow Generations is a new game, but I still think it's a joke that that's a thing. I think a lot of people expected this on the list, but that is going to be Mario Party Jamboree. Now, for whatever reason, Nintendo was like, hey, we released Super Mario Party Jamboree last year for the Nintendo Switch 1. Let's take this and make a new version of it for the Nintendo Switch 2. And this version was going to include Jamboree TV, if you notice on the box art. And the concept of this actually sounded pretty incredible. I'm not gonna lie, I was looking forward to this as it was heavily using the camera and the mouse controls of the Nintendo Switch 2. This truly felt like that they were going to be doing a lot with the Switch 2 hardware. Then the game actually came out, and Bowser TV mode, for example, is pretty short, and I think one of the worst features about the Nintendo Switch 2 edition of this game is the fact that all the exclusive Switch 2 features onto this, you can't even utilize within online play. And I feel like over the last few Mario Party releases, Nintendo has been heavily pushing the online side of things when it comes to Mario Party, and the fact that that was blocked out and there's no way to use those Switch 2 features in online play, I think is incredibly disappointing, because there could have been a lot of fun to be had into this game. Listen, it's 2025, and I don't think not everyone has the access to having everyone over for a party as easy as it was back in the day, and there really should be an option to have that online play. Not to mention, I think there would have been a lot of viral moments that would have been captured online if this had the play onto that, because as I mentioned before, it utilizes the camera, the mouse, even utilizes the microphone side of things of the camera, and these mini games can be really fun. But once again, no one is able to use this as much because of how they did this. I believe that this was fixed as well, but at launch, if you wanted to play online, you couldn't play the Switch 2 version of the mini games from Jamboree. You would have to go to the Switch 1 version of the game, and you wouldn't have like the resolution update or anything like that when it comes to playing with friends. There was a lot of weird plays with this game. It was just not a great decision from Nintendo. Not to mention, something that I pointed out in my video, to really get the full benefits of this game, you're gonna have to own the Nintendo Switch 2 camera, which is an extra $50. So if we were to be technical about this, this Mario Party game is technically $130 if you want to truly play this game. And really, part of the benefits of the Switch 2 version is having that camera. So Nintendo really dropped the gun on this, and I'm hoping that their next entry in the Mario Party series will be way better and realize the mistakes that they made, because this was definitely a mistake. And if it wasn't for the fact that I am a Nintendo YouTuber, I would have never bought this game because of how expensive it is. This is a brutal price point for the Nintendo Switch 2 game library, in my opinion. Next up on the list is one that I definitely regret owning for the Nintendo Switch 2, and that is Persona 3 Reload. Now, I could sit here and make all the jokes that I want about this game. If you are familiar with my content, you will know that I was never the biggest fan of Persona 3 Reload. However, I said I was going to review the Switch 2 version of this game and give you my thoughts on the port if it was like one of the best ports out there onto the system. Because Atlus had a track record of doing really good ports for the Switch 1, and I expected for the Switch 2, their track record was going to remain the same. However, when Persona 3 Reload dropped onto the Nintendo Switch 2, it is probably going to be, in my opinion, the worst port that has ever been made for this system so far. Now, it's playable. I'm not saying it's an unplayable game in any shape or form. However, there is a lot of things that was done into this version of the game that is just questionable and flat out lazy. In fact, Atlus has admitted that they rushed to get Persona 3 Reload out for the Nintendo Switch 2. And I don't know why you would publicly ever want to admit that you rushed a game out. I think a lot of people can assume that you're rushing something, but I don't think it's ever a good look to flat out admit that, especially as a giant game company. But they admitted that this was actually supposed to come out in the middle of next year. I believe they said early, mid next year, and they had it come out. They didn't say why they wanted it to come out, but I assume it's because of the holiday sales that they wanted to be a part of. But they made this game 30 frames per second. I did a whole review talking about how I felt it was a ugly 30 frames per second, and you guys in my comments actually corrected me, talking about the fact that it's called frame pacing. And this game has some of the worst frame pacing that I have ever seen in a port. Not to mention, it's $60 and doesn't come with all of the DLC. Atlus really went lazy on this version of Persona 3 for the Nintendo Switch 2, and I think that that's very disappointing for a lot of its fans, because I do know a lot of people like this game, and this would have been a big deal for the Nintendo Switch 2 considering how long these Persona games are. I really feel that Persona on a Nintendo platform, or really just any platform where you can take it on the go, is the best way to play these games. But if you're looking to play Persona 3 onto the Switch 2, I would probably stay away until they fix it, which they have confirmed that they're going to be fixing the frame rate of Persona 3 onto the Switch 2. However, They didn't say when, and I don't expect it to be this year, considering that this game was supposed to come out at some point next year. Point of the matter is, Sega and Atlas shouldn't have done this. And I'm noticing a theme with the Sega games on Nintendo Switch too. It seems like all of the ports have been bare bones, lazy cash grabs. That's really all I can explain that Sega has been doing for the Nintendo Switch 2. And if you guys don't know, Sega actually owns Atlas. You know, this next one is probably going to be the most controversial one within the video, because a lot of people actually like this for the Nintendo Switch 2. However, if you followed the channel, you will know that I am not too fond of this version of the game. That game is none other than Hogwarts Legacy for the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, listen. I am not saying that this is a bad version of the game out there. However, I really do not like the direction that they went within this game. One of the things that I highlighted in my review video was the fact that they had said, Avalanche Studios, that this game was not going to be a port, that this was going to be a brand new version of the game made for the Nintendo Switch 2. And my whole issue with this is that they lied about that, because if you look within this game, compare it to the Switch 1 and the Switch 2, you can tell that this is a port, that they up-res the textures, because if you look throughout the game, you will also find a lot of textures that weren't updated, that look very similar to the Switch 1. And my whole point is that I don't like that they advertise this as not a port when it clearly was. And let me emphasize something as well, that the Switch 2 version is way better than the Switch 1 version. If you put the two together, you will see giant comparisons. However, you will notice throughout cutscenes that there are things that they did not fix or do a good job fixing. One of those things being the hair textures, or really the textures throughout the whole map of Hogwarts Legacy. So if you're looking for the definitive way to play this on a Nintendo platform, yes, the Switch 2 is the way to go. I just feel like if you look at some of these third-party games that are out for the Nintendo Switch 2, the care that was given to that coming to the Switch 2, and then you look at something like Hogwarts Legacy, I don't feel like the same care or treatment was given to this game compared to some of the other third-party games out there for the platform, which is why I always have felt a little disappointed by this. This is still a great game, still great to play onto the Switch 2 if you can find it for a cheap price. I am just disappointed and kind of regret the purchase of owning this for the Switch 2. I think that, again, if it wasn't for what I did onto this platform, I probably wouldn't have bought this. At the very least, I would have waited for a big sell onto this game. And for the final game for this video of stuff that I regret purchasing for the Nintendo Switch 2, I think has to go to Kirby and the Forgotten Land, the Nintendo Switch 2 edition. Now, let me emphasize something before I talk about this. I think that Kirby and the Forgotten Land is one of the best Nintendo Switch 1 games out there for the system. I have talked very highly of this game. I've even recommended it to friends and family. I think it's, again, one of the best Switch 1 games out there. But when they announced that they were making a Switch 2 edition of this game with extra content, I was a little bit skeptical, especially after the Mario Party incident. For myself, I really didn't want extra content within this Kirby game. I just wanted to be able to play this game at 60 frames per second. I wanted it to be a part of those free updates that Nintendo was doing, where they were updating the resolution, frame rate, stuff like that to some of these Switch 1 games, because they have been doing that already. And part of the extra content that they were adding to this version of the game was the fact that you would be able to play it at 60 frames per second, along with having access to the Star-Crossed World. The Star-Crossed World was their big advertising point for this being an extra $20. And from the footage that I had seen, it looked like it was a bunch of level remixes. So I was pretty worried about this, and I didn't like where the direction that these Nintendo Switch 2 edition of games were heading, because at the end of the day, I think most people really just want to be able to play these games in 60 FPS. I don't think they care about the extra content, but I don't want to say I speak for everyone, but you guys can let me know in the comments down below. Point of the matter is, the game released and I played Star-Crossed World, and I finished it within the span of 3 hours. There is not much content in here, and for $20, I think it was pretty bare bones considering the history that Nintendo has done. Something that I compared it heavily to in my video review was the fact that Splatoon DLC ended up being like 10 to 14 hours depending how you played the game, and Nintendo only charged $20 for that. And here you have them charging $20 for 3 hours of Star-Crossed Worlds, which a majority of the levels is remixes. It does have a really cool final boss, I will say. It's probably cooler than the original final boss of Kirby in the Forgotten Land. But for $20, I felt heavily disappointed and kind of gypped. And I know when I made my video, a lot of you felt the same way, that it was one of those things that I wish Nintendo would have put this development time into like the next Kirby entry. All we wanted was the 60 FPS. And unfortunately, it seems like we're going in the direction where we're going to see a lot of Switch 1 games get extra content that we really don't want, just for them to charge an extra $20 to call the Switch 2 edition. Now guys, I want to hear from you. What are some of the games that you regret buying for the Nintendo Switch 2? Those were the 5 that came to mind with me. I feel like there's going to be some of that where you guys will agree and disagree, so I think it's going to be a very interesting video in the comment section here. Guys, I have been talking for way too much. Make sure to backslash that subscribe button, like the video, check out the Twitter, Discord, Instagram, all that good stuff in the description below. Become a MonadoMax member. $5 a month helps out the channel tremendously. That is also in the description below. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.